It is a tale as old as time. A game developer nerfs weapons in their video game, the community gets really angry, and then the studio promises to do better. And since time is a flat circle, they do it all over again. Currently, Helldivers 2 and Arrowhead Game Studios are taking their own ride on this repetitious merry-go-round, but this time, it's not ending in the way that you might expect. Most of the time when these situations arrive, the player base has very few options. They can shout or complain on Twitter, maybe go to Reddit or official forums, and they can obviously just stop playing, which, judging by the player numbers right now, a lot of people are choosing to do that, but it always feels as though there is not an active or aggressive option available. Well, Helldivers are cut from tougher stuff, and in a strange twist of irony, the game devs may have created their own monster that the community can now dictate what happens to the game. So this story doesn't currently have a happy ending because it doesn't really have an ending. Last week, a series of nerfs hit the game before the latest War Bond update, and at the end of July, I took a pretty firm stance on that the update would not be enough because they weren't really focusing on nerfs or buffs, and that would likely be what would need to bring players back. Now, I got a lot of flack for that video, and when the nerfs hit, I said they were not the answer, and the tone and the response from the community was vastly different, with most people agreeing with me. And here we sit, a week later, the community is steaming mad, and some have gone beyond just taking a break from the game. The CEO attempted to calm things down, but it seemingly only added gas to the fire, leading the community to conclude there was only one answer: treason. So the burning questions are, what in the world happened, and where will this treasonous response take us? Well, that's what we're going to try to find out. Now, every weekday here on Reforge Gaming, I tell you what I think about a gaming topic, and then we go to a live stream where I want to hear what you think. So stick around and hit like and subscribe. It's no secret that weapon nerfs aren't very popular with any game community, and they are especially irksome in a game like Helldivers 2. The game has no PvP to speak of, and the core identity of the game seems to be very non-serious and chaotic. So many fans of the game, myself included, really question the wisdom of trying to fine-tune a game that a lot of people think shouldn't really take itself so seriously. And to add insult to injury, the developers decided to nerf fire weapons right before, get this, they pushed out an update in a War Bond that was fire-themed. The War Bond is actually titled Freedom's Flame, with weapons like the Cookout and the Torture and the Crisper. Beyond the weapons, even the armor had passive resistance to fire. Interestingly enough, the update and the nerf patch actually garnered a bigger player spike than the new content itself. A quick look at the Steam charts paints a very bad picture that I sadly said was likely to happen. Even a brand new War Bond and the weekend of increased playtime typically rises the numbers, but it was no match for the chilling effect that weapon nerfs can have on your game. But the Helldivers 2 community did not go quietly into the night. While the update did not garner any measurable turnaround in player numbers, it certainly garnered a lot of criticism. If there is one thing gamers have been proven over the years, is that they are very vocal when you do something they don't like. Whether it's a sequel, a DLC, seasonal update, or a patch, they will quickly and loudly let you know if you have stepped wrong. And sometimes it can be difficult to parse through the feedback if there is a lack of consensus. Some players may like the new content or the changes, while others claim that the game is ruined. In the case of Helldivers 2, I think it's clear when you pair the criticisms with the player numbers that we already discussed that there is a very strong and growing consensus, especially when in my previous video we looked at the spike in negative reviews. And if you look at where the recent reviews have landed since then, it has not improved. The negative is still outweighing the positive by a good margin. A quick browsing of the negative reviews, you're going to see things like the game has been gutted every other patch, or that the devs just hate fun, and that the balance philosophy needs to go. One thing most of the negative reviews have in common as well, if you look at them, is lots of playtime. It was rare for me to see a negative review with less than 100 hours, and some of them were in the 200 to 300 hours of playtime. And the thing that surprised me the most about this recent situation is just how many folks were strongly defending the nerfs. I've been told to get good or just play something else more times than I can count. More than that, I saw folks outright attacking others in my comments, saying that if players aren't happy, they should just go find another game to play. Sadly, this type of response is common, and it represents a real problem for the game devs. Your most hardcore players and fans can become your most unhelpful sources of feedback, especially when they go out of their way to attack those who are voicing their criticism or their dissatisfaction. It can create a toxic environment where honest feedback is given negative reinforcement, and those shouting, "just go play something else," will probably be unhappy with the results if they get their wish. Because based on the player patterns that I'm seeing, many have already moved on from the new content. And the real danger is that those players don't return, because based on the feedback and the criticism, along with the toxic defense force of the game, many might decide that this game just isn't worth it anymore. Well, have no fear, Helldivers. The newly appointed CEO is here to address your concerns. The range of response from the CEO has certainly been a bit all over the place. In my previous video where I said that nerfs were not the answer, we looked at how he spoke on the incendiary breaker nerf, and I took issue with the implication that something was nerfed simply because a lot of people were using it, not because it was broken or busted. And I predicted that the response from the developers would typically be something about they wanted a variety of options for the players, which is certainly not wrong, but it often leads to players just asking for everything to be buffed. Now, I'm not going to retread why buffing everything doesn't work either, but the CEO responded to all of this, and rather than post his lengthy comments and read through everything, I will summarize the one part by saying he does like the buff everything approach, but he did admit it has a lot of consequences. One of those consequences being it can sort of negatively impact other parts of the game, and he admitted that game balance can be a bit of whack-a-mole, which I actually find incredibly unhelpful. In my previous video, I literally said that chasing balance is a fool's errand for this very reason. You just end up playing powerful gun whack-a-mole, and the community will never internalize that in a good way. It will always feel like their fun is being trampled on. And the CEO wasn't done with just speaking to that. He does actually provide, I think, some helpful insight into why it feels like we're retreading familiar and unpopular ground that already took place earlier this year. PC Gamer published an article about how the CEO said they need to do better and that talking isn't enough because actions matter. And one of his replies seems to emphasize something that I have said a few times in recent weeks. The developers seem to be finding their way as they were not prepared for such a popular game, as well as dealing with a live service player funnel at this scale, because it is very challenging. And here's the part I'm referring to, this quote. His replies on Discord, however, paint an interesting picture. One of a studio racing to keep up with the demands of that loud and impassioned player base. Giorgiani writes, quote, "I haven't spoken to everyone, of course, but many of us are disappointed on a few levels. I think a lot of you fairly point out, WTF, we went through this earlier this year, why are we here again?" Now, I've been hard on the studio. My nerfing video was really made in an effort to help with suggestions about a good path forward with my sort of unbalanced weapons, essentially creating experimental weapons through lore in the game. And I'm going to give them some credit here, okay? They're not just acknowledging feedback, he's also affirming it, and he's saying that that feedback is fair. But he goes on to explain why some of the problems will not be rectified anytime soon. And this is what he says. "We have long lead times on development. What you see is the result of weeks and months of development work. Some changes take time before they show. Not a whole lot of time has passed between now and the June balance round, and most people are still on vacation. This certainly poses a challenge for the game long term, and they aren't the first studio to face this. I remember reading and hearing very similar things about Destiny when a season would land and the content seemed to directly contradict and go against player feedback. It was then that we learned about parallel development and how most of what we were playing and most of what we were interacting with had been set in motion for months or sometimes up to an entire year before it landed in the game. The challenge here is a game that that ends up feeling out of touch. Players scream until they're blue in the face, and then when the updates finally land, the entirety of the game and its player base has shifted. The good news is that he does agree the game generally takes too long to kill certain enemies, and that they do need some North Star goals to guide them. This is precisely what I tried to drive home in my previous video. You can't just react to and bounce off data points and player feedback, because the players certainly aren't done providing their feedback as what they want to see, and what happened next is likely not what the studio was hoping to see. The Helldivers 2 community has proven that if you cross them, they will go to great lengths to fight back. The response to the PSN login required on Steam certainly proved that, and now they have chosen Treason as the path forward. Is this because the CEO said they were disappointed that the new content was getting negative reaction? Was it because he said the update actually had some nice stuff that wasn't being talked about? Well, it's hard to know, but the response has been swift, and it could be very interesting with respect to results of the game itself. And a PC Gamer article helps paint the bleak picture with this title: Let Super Earth Burn. Helldivers 2 players are committing treason to protest its latest patch along a tide of bots to creep worryingly close to home. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the game, even the devs said before the game launched that they weren't sure where things would end up with the Galactic War, as the player response and behavior would play a direct role in how things play out. And the PC Gamer article points to a Reddit thread that currently has about 3,000 upvotes, and it simply says, "Let the bots advance. Let the Super Earth burn." Now, in the thread, it's just a very quick and dramatic speech ripped directly from a Warhammer game, and you might just quickly dismiss this and be like, this is all pomp and circumstance. This is just people being dramatic, and you're like, oh, 3,000 upvotes, that's nothing compared to the player base at large. But the player base numbers are dropping right back to where they were pre-update, and Treason may be more effective now than it would be in the past. Because the thing you may be forgetting, and the thing the devs should take serious, is this player base is very effective at rallying behind a cause. And once that cause becomes an us versus the dev situation, I can't take my usual response to this. In times past, I would say, listen, if folks are angry and they're voicing that angry, that's not a cause for concern. It means they're invested, it means they're playing, it means they're passionate. But this feels different, and it could have a negative impact on the game as well as the Galactic War. Because if Arrowhead fights back by manipulating the results, players will likely not take very kindly to that. Regardless of what happens with the recent rise of Treason, Arrowhead needs to pump the brakes and really plan for a Phase 2 or a 2.0 moment. Not that the game needs to get back to the previous player peaks when the game was at all-time highs, but they do need to create better elasticity as well as response time. You have to allow player feedback to land more efficiently and quickly in the game, while also creating a base game experience and plan that doesn't feel so tumultuous. Because right now the game feels unpredictable, but not in a good way. And the predictable parts are nerfs and player angry, and that just will not result in good things. And it's not just going to result in treason, it could result in a slow and unpreventable death. But those are just my thoughts, and now it's time to hear your thoughts. And you can do that in a comment below, or come to the live stream, which will be in a card that hits right here. We also put it in a pinned comment below. And if you like this type of content, stick around for more and hit like, share, and subscribe.